Okay, let's go ahead. In spite of the weaknesses on the last exam, I see we're slender today. That wouldn't seem to compute very well. Since we're just starting out, let's get out that romantic listening list in your syllabus. Let me give you the track numbers.
This next track is going to be easier. I'm familiar with one of the pieces.
Okay. Of course, the Berlioz starts with track 1. Brahms starts with 15. Rossini starts on 22. Sibelius starts on 29, and it's only number 29. Dvorak is only number 30. 31 is only Puccini. Puccini is only number 31, sorry. Schubert is only number 32. No, I'm sorry, I take that back. Schubert starts on 32. The Gretchen am Spinnrad starts on 32. Schubert der König, and I didn't know how to do it, but there's an umlaut over the O, which you should add. Starts on 38. The Mahler example starts on 44. And the Chopin starts on 52. And the tracks go up through 55. Okay. And I guess they're out to the side there, aren't they?
Yeah.
But anyway, you have them. So the Dvorak is not indexed, and neither is Finlandia.
Okay.
Anybody seen the movie Die Hard 2?
A while back.
While back?
Yeah.
Yeah. The ending music of Die Hard 2, from the time that the plane's on the runway, there are little snatches of Finlandia. And then at the end, as they run the name credits for about 12 or 15 minutes, it's the entire Finlandia.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, it's really good. Because I'm thinking to myself, as they're out on the runway where they have that trumpet flourish, I thought, gee, that's just like in Finlandia. And so then when it's over and they start to run all the name credits and stuff, I thought, it is Finlandia. And then about 8 minutes into the name credits, there's just thousands of them. It says, and thanks to Sibelius, Finlandia. So, of course, we sat there and watched the whole name credits and listened to all of Finlandia. All right, well, we were talking about Schumann last time and said that he had collections of these short character pieces. Well, I went ahead and wrote the titles of 3 of his collections on the board for you. And you can get them now, or you can get them out of the text at another time. Schumann, perhaps more than any other composer, put into his music the extreme tensions and extreme emotions of romantic music. And at least in this respect, he's considered by a lot of people to be the, quote, most romantic composer. He was a very creative and imaginative person. He dreamed up an imaginary organization called the Davidsbund. And the Davidsbund was composed of fictitious people who were there to crusade against musical Philistines. Okay, an obvious reference to stuff in the Bible. In his writings and in the Davidsbund, there are these 3 characters: Florestan, Eusebius, and Raro. Now, Florestan, we could describe as the personality of an impulsive revolutionary. Impulsive revolutionary. Eusebius is different. His personality is of a youthful dreamer. And Raro is different from either of the other two, characterized as a wise old master. Now, in his writings, in his essays, these are the characters in his essays, and they discuss things. And it's through these discussions that we learn quite a bit about romantic philosophy in general, and artistic philosophy particularly, and getting to know these writings and getting to know these three characters thoroughly. It's a very small step to being able to place one or more of these characters in his music at almost any given time. Listening to something, you would think to yourself, oh, well, this must be Eusebius speaking here in the music. Now remember, these are fictitious characters. It's a fictitious organization and fictitious characters. But they do seem to appear from time to time in his music as well as in his essays. As we said, the piano was the perfect instrument for him. It's, as we said, the quintessential romantic instrument because it can do so much. Schumann's most successful works are for the piano. And just as in his symphonies, those and some other of his works, we sense from time to time seem like they were in his head as piano pieces and that he just fleshed them out for whatever medium it happens to be in right now. So the longer multi-movement type pieces he wasn't that good at because he had trouble scheming out the form the way a classical composer would and the way other romantic composers who were good at it can do. But he was much better at those short emotional character pieces. And in those, these three characters seem to pop up. All right, another piano composer, Chopin. C-H-O-P-I-N, Chopin. Originally, he's Polish, but he lived in Paris the last half of his life. In the 1800s, Paris is one of the cutting-edge avant-garde type places. If there's a place you're going to go to make it, Paris is one of those places. So a lot of composers spent some time there, and Chopin spent a lot of time there, at least considering how short his life was. He was born in 1810 and died already in 1849, so he's less than the first half of the century. Almost all of Chopin's works are for the piano. We know him almost exclusively for that. And he has pieces that are based on Polish dances and therefore incorporate the rhythms of the Polish dances. Among his favorites are mazurkas.
Is this part of that nationalistic idea?
Oh yeah, I think so. Yeah. Polonaises. These wouldn't be the only ones, but they're major ones. At least of the types that have the Polish dance rhythms in it. Now, one of those dance rhythms wouldn't necessarily be in every single measure, but it's in so many measures that you can't really miss it. And particularly at the very beginning, where the patterns are established, they're unmistakably mazurkas or unmistakably polonaises or unmistakably something else. And if you just recognize what those rhythms are, the piece wouldn't have to have a title. You would just know that that's what it is. And we've said this kind of thing before, particularly about a suite for example, that has the standard movements of allemande, courant, sarabande, and gigue. And we said, for example, the sarabande has a rhythm of in triple meter, bum, 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 bum. Not every measure, but many measures. And particularly the way it's established at the beginning. So it wouldn't have to say sarabande on it. You would just know that it was. And by knowing that, you would know the tempo, or pretty close to it, just because that's the way sarabande is danced. Okay? The influence of dance music tells you a lot about a composition. So if something is a gigue, for example, and you perceive that it is with or without title, with or without tempo marking, you know it's fast. And the same thing, say, with the mazurka. Dum da dum 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 da dum dum da dum 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 da dum. Okay, it has that sort of jumpy step right in the middle of the measure. Well, you can only do those at a certain range of tempos without falling down or something, you know, if you were dancing them. So you kind of know what the range of tempos are for a piece like that, because that's the way it fits the dance. And if it's going to be different, then it probably has to be marked differently so that the person would know. The same sort of thing is true of all the Baroque dances as well. And there was a famous person at Stanford who for decades taught a course, a music course in dance. And you learn how to dance all these particular kinds of dances because once you knew what the steps were, you knew what the speed of the music was too. So a pavane, a galliard, a whatever, you know. It's something I always coveted doing, but I never had the opportunity. But I know it would have opened up a lot of accessory knowledge to me if I had been able to do that. Strangely enough, my high school choir director had been there, taken that course, and he was very, very expert at that. We have a Chopin piece on our CD. It's the last one. You may have actually learned it before in another course, very famous, the A-flat Grand Polonaise. Chopin, who's, you know, basically on balance one of the kings of keyboard music as far as recitals are concerned. Chopin was a very slight and frail person. He did not have a lot of body strength. He didn't really have physical power. So his piano music is not what you would call heroic sounding piano music, like, say, Lizt, or even before him, Beethoven. A lot of Beethoven piano pieces sound very heroic in their character because they make thunder on the piano. I think Chopin was just not capable of producing thunder on the piano. He was a weakling. He was, you know, the one on the beach where they kick sand in his face and there's nothing they can do. He's just physically weak. So the music of Chopin is a little bit more introspective and a little bit more precious sounding. It certainly has the sound of improvisation because he writes out very irregular melodic flourishes, sometimes with a lot of notes in very unusual numbers, squeezed into a beat or two beats or something. So the piano music of Chopin requires you to have a pretty substantial hand technique in order to be able to cope with all those really fast notes. There is also a great deal of rubato in Chopin. Everybody knows what rubato is? Right, literally, the word means stolen time, but basically it just means a speeding up and slowing down for purposes of expression. So you're borrowing time out of some notes and putting it back into others. We wish we knew how much if we only could hear Chopin play one piece so that we would know the extent to which he intended it. We'd all be a lot better off, but of course that's not possible. And the strange thing is that Chopin actually described his use of rubato. And it doesn't seem to jive with the way we feel his music, because we feel his music with sometimes an immense amount of rubato throughout a piece. But basically, he described it the same way Mozart described it in a letter to his father, and that is that you vary the tempo with the right hand, but you keep the left hand steady. It just seems to us that it's got to be more than that. And that's why we just wish to heck that we could hear Chopin play and know whether we're right or whether we're not. Also, with Chopin, you've got to be extremely skillful in the use of the pedals to make the music sound good, and not either too exposed or too muddy by not using the pedals quite right. Among the most intimate works on a small scale would be pieces called preludes, pieces called impromptus, pieces called nocturnes. You would get the impression that a nocturne would be something maybe that would be played at night. Although listening to the music, it's kind of hard to tell that. I think we did say that the nocturne was an influence from John Field, whom we mentioned last time. Field was also a great pianist, and he composed a lot of music that sounds a lot like Chopin's. So if we listen to one and then the other, we would see that the manner of the piece between Field and Chopin's pretty similar. Which sort of makes you wonder why Field isn't a little bit better known, you know? I mean, yes, he's outdistanced a bit by Chopin, but so what? You would think that people would play pieces by Field a lot more often just because of their similarity in style and manner to those of Chopin. Chopin also developed an interest in Bach, and he composed a set of 24 preludes. So, of course, that seems to come from Bach, the 24 in each book of the Well-Tempered Clavier. And we mentioned Mendelssohn the other day, the Songs Without Words. There are 48 of those. These 24 preludes utilize all the major and minor keys, just like Bach. Well, not just like, because whereas Bach's climb up in half steps, C major and C minor, C sharp major and C minor, etc., Chopin's set goes through the circle of fifths. So C major and A minor, G major, E minor, etc. Chopin has 4 fairly lengthy piano pieces, which are called ballades. Ballades. They're very substantial pieces, about 20 minutes each. Takes a good deal of preparation to play a ballade. Where does the word ballade come from that Chopin appropriated? Well, a Polish poet had written a series of works which he called ballades. And this set of very long poetry, each of the poems seems to kind of tell a story. Well, we're at a loss to think what the stories might be in these Chopin ballades, but they do sort of have the feeling that they are telling a story. It's just there's no trace of what the stories might be. And nobody has been able to put anything together, and they're certainly not related to the original use of the word ballade by that poet and the poetic subject matter. Another important set of works by Chopin is the Etudes, And by the way, there are 24 of those also, right? Magic number. What's an etude? Well, an etude is a piece designed to provide a technical problem in a musical work, which gives the player a vehicle for practicing and developing his technical skill in regards to whatever that technical problem is. Now, what's so important about the Chopin etudes? It isn't just that they are technically difficult, which they are, but they are works of extraordinarily high artistic content. They are not exercises. They are not just teaching pieces. They're masterworks. Why is this significant? Because everybody after this now has to come up to that standard in pieces that are called etudes. They can't just be study pieces. They have to be great works of art. All right, so a new standard for other composers like Brahms, Lizt, others who took this seriously, and their etudes are very, very high in terms of their artistic level. All right, well, we've mentioned Liszt before. Let's list him specifically. L-I-S-Z-T. He actually lived a pretty good long time, 1811 to 1886. So it's most of the period. He's Hungarian. His father was an employee of Prince Nicholas Esterhazy. How about that? Liszt was a student of the virtuoso pianist Czerny. By the way, we've mentioned Czerny enough times, let's make sure we know how to spell Czerny. Czerny. Liszt debuted as a concert artist at the tender age of 11. Just like Chopin, he lived a good deal of his early adult life in Paris, which, as we said, became the most avant-garde musical city of the 19th century. Liszt was famous as a pianist and also as a composer and also as a conductor, a stand-up conductor in front of the orchestra. As a matter of fact, Liszt conducted the world premiere performances of several Wagnerian operas because he was thick with Wagner. He became, mostly as a pianist and conductor, one of the most pedestalized, larger-than-life, heroic figures of the period, as a virtuoso pianist of unprecedented skill. He had several highly publicized affairs with very prominent women that definitely contributed to his fame. It didn't hurt that he was drop-dead gorgeous, very tall, lanky. Remember, in the 1900s, I think, well, in all time, through the 1900s, through the 19th century, into the 20th century, people weren't very tall. And Liszt was extremely tall. And this contributed to sort of the awe factor I think, that he could do things on the piano that people thought couldn't be done. Accused, just like Paganini, of perhaps being possessed by the devil. That human beings can't do this stuff, even though they're watching him do it. There's got to be something that we don't know. This was sort of the same awe factor, say, for George Washington. I don't know how exactly tall George Washington was, but it was probably 6'4", 6'5", 6'6", something like that. Very tall at a time when people weren't tall. A lot of us would be tall back then, whereas now pretty much just average height. So these people who towered over everybody else, they were people who stuck out and attracted attention. And especially if there was some awe-inspiring quality about them as well, it all really went together. He had very large hands, wide palms, long fingers. Among the things he was able to do was to play chromatic scales, lightning fast, the full length of the keyboard in opposite directions with only the fourth and fifth fingers. That's right. That's right. You got to be kidding. He could do things that other human beings couldn't conceive of doing at the time. Must be possessed. How else could a person do this? Yeah, you try it sometime. See how it is. Now, in spite of these charges of womanizing and stuff like that, he did take minor orders in the Catholic Church in the 1860s. And, of course, the Romantics developed arguments about, was this for real, or was this just a smoke screen to cover up the affairs behind the scenes and stuff like that. Whatever the truth is, it doesn't really matter. He did have a kind of fiery, impulsive temperament, but remember, it's the time of emotional extremes, so temperaments like that, not a big surprise. At the same time, he was very, very kind and generous. And so if somebody came to him wanting piano lessons or composition lessons or something like that, and they were dirt poor, but they looked like they had talent, then he'd just go ahead and help them and not require any payment. The works of Liszt are extremely programmatic. Often, they do have descriptive titles. They have such bold and innovative chromatic harmony that we sort of identify it as an early step leading to the breakdown of tonality in the early 20th century. Very chromatic. Liszt, in his younger days, was impressed with the virtuosity of the violinist Paganini, who was already one of the quintessential, heroic, larger-than-life performers of the period. Liszt resolved to become the Paganini of the piano, and he did. One result of this is a set of 12 etudes called the Transcendental Etudes. We used to have one of these in the anthology. We don't anymore. It's a terrible casualty of the new edition because it's the kind of piece that we need to look at. It requires 3 staffs to be able to accommodate the notes. And there is such jumping around back and forth to the extremes of the piano with melodic stuff in between that looking at it and probably watching somebody do it, it seems impossible that a single person could actually play all of this stuff. But there it is, and he played it, and people thought it couldn't be done, and that nobody else would ever be able to do it. But as with everything else, once somebody has done it, it sort of breaks the ice, and then other people are able to do it. Did we talk about the person
About running.
who first ran the sub 4-minute mile by a fraction of 1 second? It had been conceived of something that a human being could never do, but within a year of that, 20 other people suddenly were able to do it, that it was a psychological barrier more than it was a physical barrier. Well, the same with the works of Liszt. Yes, they seem to be unplayable by human beings, but there he is playing them, and people figure, well, maybe I can do it too. They were, at least at the time, of unrivaled virtuosity. There are 3 versions: 1826, 1839, and 1852. He revised the 1826 version, and therefore the 1839 version is even more difficult than the original. And apparently that was off the charts for too many people, so the 1852 revision is actually a little bit easier. Now, these are solo piano works. He does have large-scale piano works with orchestra. There are 2 piano concertos, for example. One's in E-flat major, the other's in A major. Don't know if the tritone relationship has any significance or not. We have had one of them played on a symphony concert. I can't remember when. It's been a while. Liszt also contributed a great many transcriptions of other people's works for the piano. He even transcribed Wagnerian operas for the piano. In addition to Schubert, Lieder, and many other things. Why would he do this? I mean, they're already so wonderful in their own form. Why would he do such a thing? We got lots of piano music. Why do we need transcriptions of operas for piano? Well, it's true he could, and he worked all the time. But it's probably a part of this generous attitude that he knew a lot of people would never be able to hear that music, either because they didn't live in the places where it was being performed, or they wouldn't be able to afford to go. And so he transcribed it for piano and performed them on piano to give people an opportunity to hear and experience that music, even though it's not in its original form. Yes, a kind of volatile temperament, but a very kind and generous streak in him also. Liszt, by the way, was one of the first composers to really make extensive use of augmented triads. When you were taking theory, you learned how to write an augmented triad. You saw a few examples in the book. Have you run into very many examples since then? No, not too many. There aren't that many composers who really use them. But Liszt was a pioneer in using the augmented triad. Of course, that is a chromatic sonority. And as we said, his music is extremely chromatic. All right, let's go to Brahms. Every time we bring up Brahms, we say he was highly conservative as a romantic composer. He took his models from Beethoven and Schumann. He did not use much of the improvisatory sounding flourishes of Chopin. He did not use the gaudy technical virtuosity of Liszt. The sound of Brahms is characterized again by a full, dark sonority, broken chord figures, cross rhythms, doubling of the melodic line internally in thirds or sixths or octaves. What is a cross rhythm? In a cross rhythm, you would have two parts going at the same time. And let's say it's in 3/4 time. One of the parts sounds like 3/4 time. The other part might sound like 6/8 time. So what's the difference between the two? The accent pattern, the grouping of the notes. That's right. So a conflict in two rhythmic levels, we could call a cross rhythm. Brahms did not write any, underline any, program music. Did not write any program music. He had no interest in a lot of the philosophical tenets of Romanticism in all its extremes. Instead, he used the usual classical forms. He used the classical thematic process of development. And just like Mendelssohn, he's one of the few composers to write a significant body of organ music. I guess with piano music, we could even mention Mussorgsky. Lots of spellings of Mussorgsky. Take your pick. Anything? You find a half dozen spellings of Mussorgsky. Something close to that's all right. Probably Mussorgsky's most famous composition today is Pictures at an Exhibition. We hear it for orchestra, but it was originally for piano. Only later was the piece orchestrated. We could mention César Franck, F-R-A-N-C-K. The works of Franck are extraordinarily chromatic in the manner of Liszt and Wagner. He wrote a lot of organ music, founded a new school of organ music in France. In the works of Franck, because they are so chromatic, you can have passages that sound like parallel fifths, even though they're not written that way. They don't look like parallel fifths, they just sound like parallel fifths. We've been saying that the Romantic period is the period of extremes. Always remember that. Therefore, the best medium for music was the piano. It's kind of like a one-man orchestra. Another quintessential Romantic medium would be the solo song with piano. Another would be music for orchestra. Notice that orchestra has great possibilities for expression because of all the different instruments that are in it. Well, you have large and you have small. But what's caught in the middle that doesn't fit so well in the Romantic period is chamber music. It is not thought to be ideal for Romantic expression. Well, as a result then, and I don't think we should be too surprised by it, the best chamber music in the Romantic period is by the conservative, classically influenced composers. Schubert, Brahms, perhaps to a lesser degree Mendelssohn and Schumann. if you are going to name a greatest composer of romantic chamber music, there's no argument. It's going to be Brahms. Why would that be? Well, all of the aforementioned have important works in chamber music repertoire. But of all the works in chamber music that a composer writes, Brahms probably has the highest percentage of his that are considered the most important works of the period. That's what sort of puts him in first place. Brahms is the true successor of Beethoven in chamber music, and we've already said that he's the true successor of Beethoven in symphonies as well. The radical romantic composers would be Berlioz, Liszt, Wagner. None of them wrote any chamber music. It's just not for them. All right, well, since we're in chamber music, let's do that a little bit. In terms of Schubert, there are three works that we could mention. One of them is referred to as the Trout Quintet. And the reason for that is that in it, he uses very prominently a theme from one of his songs entitled, anybody? Di Forella. The fish, the trout. So the Trout Quintet, because he uses that song melody in it. In the slow movement, which is a theme and variations movement, so you get to hear Di Forella melody several times. Another one is a quartet, which is referred to as Der Tod und das Mädchen.
Who is this composer again?
Schubert.
Okay.
Death and the Maiden. All right, so a theme and variations on this song melody in that one. And then the third one is a string quintet. The fifth instrument is an extra cello. So that would be first violin, second violin, viola, and two cellos. Quintet, kind of a little bit unusual. Extra cello, of course, creates a warm, rich sound. A lot of emphasis on the low register and the tone quality of the cellos. Very, very beautiful piece. And romantic, third related keys, flats, plenty of enharmonic notes and chords, things you would expect in a romantic piece. As we saw in the classical period, classical sonatas, classical symphonies were very sectional. You had no problem picking out the form. And if you recall, when we were talking about Mozart, the music changes noticeably when you leave the first theme and go to the transition. And then when he finishes the transition, there's a nice cadence on the dominant and a rest. And then you have theme two. You can't avoid figuring it out. It's just so transparent and obvious. And then, of course, using the themes in a developmental manner. Well, romantic music is a lot less sectional. It is much more continuous in a more unbroken stream, and sometimes a series of picturesque sounding episodes without any especially strong formal unity to them. We've mentioned a little bit before that the Romantic Symphony depended on using the same theme across several movements, the cyclical technique, as a unifying factor, because it didn't have the classical unifying factors. That theme or remnants of the theme could be identical or could be transformed a little bit across the different movements. The popular ballads in England and Scotland became popular as poetic types in Germany. There are plenty of poetic works that are lengthy. They deal with romantic adventures, sometimes supernatural incidents. And so these story poems, so to speak, became favorite subject matter for Romantic composers. The poems, of course, would be what we would call through composed. Have we used that term before? Yes. And that means
New from beginning to end?
constantly new from beginning to end, not going back and repeating previous material. So if the story is continuous, the music's going to be continually new as well. And let's take the German also, because you see that a lot. Durchkomponiert, remembering that Romanticism is a Germanic thing. Okay, so lots of German terms in the Romantic period. All right, if they're through composed, they're going to have a big range of emotional content. They're long, and so the greater length of the shifting moods and emotions means that you can't really use strophic form. It's got to be different. On and on and on and on and on. You can't just use the same music over and over and over again, because it's not going to fit the subject matter except for the first time it's used. Too much contrast of mood, too many contrasts in the story that have to be captured and enhanced by changes in the music. In writing these things, and as a result of these sort of story poems, if you're going to set them as a song, that means that the Lied is expanded quite a bit into a longer and more elaborate song. And one of the things that's really important that the Romantic composers do is they elevate the piano part to a position of equality in importance with the voice part. That it doesn't just ooh-pa-pa along with the singer. It actually contributes to the emotional drama along the way in terms of its sound quality. So this is something that really appeals to composers, and they start to pour their very best efforts into things like that. Well, in terms of Romantic song, just based on sheer output, one of the major figures has to be Schubert. He composed more than 600 songs. That's a major contribution. He said one time, "I work every morning. When I finish one piece, I begin another. With the double bar, start the next." We've said a couple of times in other types of pieces that Schubert's signature is beautiful melody. You think that goes well in a song? Well, absolutely. Now, out of the 600 plus, there's a heck of a lot of variety. Some of them are very simple. Some of them are folk-like. Some of them are dramatic. Some of them are declamatory. Some are sweet. Some are melancholy. It's pretty much anything. He's got representative songs for almost anything you could possibly name. In addition to melody, his other area of great expertise, I would say, would be harmony. The harmony is rich and colorful. Modulations sometimes are to rather remote keys. And as he's getting there to a new key, sometimes it's rather ambiguous about where he's going, keeping the listener in suspense. When he modulates, they do tend to move towards keys with more flats. He likes going to mediant and submediant. He likes using borrowed chords. When you were studying borrowed chords, what was one of the great values, great usefulnesses of borrowed chords? Well, for coloristic effect, sure, but what about in terms of modulation? When you use a borrowed chord, it opens up a whole new set of places you can go. All right? So the easiest modulations are to what we call closely related keys. If you're in C, then that's going to be going to A minor, D minor, E minor, F major, G major, okay, closely related keys. But if in C major you used a borrowed chord out of C minor, like maybe an E flat major chord, then all of a sudden you've got all these other keys with a whole bunch of flats in them, which are now closely related keys. A long way from the original key of C major, but a fairly closely related key to your borrowed chord. All right? So you can get off into pretty remote areas quickly and easily through borrowed chords. One of the things Schubert likes to do is vacillate back and forth between major mode and minor mode. And of course, you would identify something in the text that would cause him to do so. The piano accompaniments of Schubert, very ingenious. An accompaniment could be suggested by some image in the text. A good example would be a bubbling brook in a piece called Bohème, for example. Bubbling brook. Okay? The Earl King. Okay? That incessant triplet, okay, that represents the image of the galloping horse. Da 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 dum dum deedly 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 da 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 dum dum deedly 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 on and on through the whole thing. Of course, those are obvious. It could just be setting a mood. There's a song called The Doppelganger. What's that?
A copy?
A ghost or an apparition. And so the sound of the piano part is dark and mysterious with very tensive chords and a certain degree of unpredictability about it. In longer texts, he might alternate between declamatory style and arioso style. Here's one of the things you can say about Schubert. He wrote more than 600 songs, so he needs a lot of poetry. A lot. Well, sometimes he chooses the highest level of poetry by the very best German poets. But not always. Sometimes he chooses crappy sentimental poetry that's second rate. Is there any difference in the music? No. It doesn't matter whether it's great poetry or cheap poetry. The music's just as wonderful, no matter what. That sets him a little above second-rate composers. A number of his songs are found in collections. Those collections are called song cycles. Well, what's a song cycle? Kind of hard to say. It's just a collection of songs that have some relationship. And sometimes that relationship is a little bit hard to figure out. But it's at least in the composer's mind, even if it seems baffling to us. They're famous and important enough, we better take some profits. Anybody know what?
The Winterreise?
Winterreise, winter landscapes. So a few of the songs are a little bit bleak, like winter. You know, snow covering everything, gray skies, bleak. No, actually, Dichterliebe is a different composer. Anybody else? That's another Schumann, that's right. Yeah, this is Schubert.
Die schöne Mühle.
The pretty Miller maiden. Die schöne Mühle. Don't forget the umlauts. Spannengesang. Dying songs. Dying strains. When I took my final exam in fourth semester theory when I was in college, the teacher entitled the exam Spannengesang. And it was darn hard. The most immediate successor to Schubert would be Schumann, Robert Schumann, remember, SCH. His music is more romantic in style than the conservative Schubert. We've said Schumann's primarily a pianist. The accompaniments to his lieder are of special interest and importance, and in my view, special difficulty. They are hard to play. He wrote more than 100 songs just in the year 1840. That was the year he finally married his longtime sweetheart, Clara. She was a well-known world-class pianist. I think her music is second-rate, but her playing was first-rate. And a couple of song cycles to mention there, as Joe said, Dichterliebe. Accompanied